The Ole Miss quarterback room goes completely against the national narrative.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, Rebel fans. I am Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. Today on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, we discuss Lane Kiffin's recent comments about backup quarterbacks and why they're performing well. It might seem like a throwaway quote, but it sparks crucial national conversation, in my opinion. The media expects Ole Miss to fall back after Jaxson Dart, but with the talents of Austin Simmons, Walker Howard, and AJ Maddox, the Ole Miss quarterback room could rival the best in all of college football this year. What I'm saying is the Rebels might have staying power. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thanks again for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers who make the show what it is. And don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC, or even Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy. They provide other perspectives on college football, the SEC, and yes, even Ole Miss. So check it out. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now, the national media narrative that is circulating college football is about the talent that has been accumulated on Ole Miss's team, but is kind of a one-year type talent. The whole thing that they're talking about is this year, Ole Miss has a chance to be really good, but they're not going to go further. Whenever you look at teams and national media perspectives that rank like 3 and 4 years down the road, those don't really think very highly of Ole Miss. They think this is Jaxson Dart's team. They think this is this team that the talent has been accumulated. And they think that after that, Ole Miss is going to regress down to what they've always been. And in many years, that would be the case, because when Ole Miss had Eli Manning, you didn't have a second in command who the next quarterback is, because the secret in college football is to win with a good quarterback. If you want to win, have a good quarterback that can perform at a high level, not just good for you, just like a legitimately good quarterback. You have Matt Corral, you win 10 games. At that point, Ole Miss should have regressed to the mean after Matt Corral. Ole Miss went out in the transfer portal and got Jaxson Dart. And he is likely going to leave Ole Miss if Ole Miss goes to the playoff as the winningest quarterback in Ole Miss football history. So when I say that regressing to the mean and the national media narrative, that's what I'm talking about. They expected Ole Miss to drop down after Matt Corral. It didn't really happen, as Ole Miss went up even a little bit higher than Corral got them to. But they assume after Jaxson Dart, the same thing is going to happen. And I think it's time that we start a national conversation about how good this quarterback room is. Lane Kiffin was asked about it at his press conference, and he just talked about how Austin Simmons, Walker Howard, and AJ Maddox, they're all doing well. It seems like an innocuous throwaway quote, but it also sounded like a guy that was intentionally not talking up these players, somebody that he didn't really want to talk about. And Lane Kiffin does that when he's trying to be coy, when he doesn't want to draw other people's attention. That's when Lane Kiffin does that. What makes me think that Austin Simmons might be the real deal, that Walker Howard might be the real deal, that AJ Maddox might be the real deal. And I think personally that Ole Miss has potentially the best quarterback room in all of college football. You're going to have people talk about Texas, obviously, with Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. And speaking as an Ole Miss podcast, yes, Arch Manning. You're going to have people talk about USC. You're going to have people talk about Ohio State, the usual suspects. And that's the key here. The national media needs this to be about the usual suspects. They need Ole Miss to regress to the mean. But that isn't in line for Ole Miss to do that in their quarterback room currently. They are currently competing for the backup quarterback job, which, by the way, do not expect Lane Kiffin to name a backup quarterback all the way through this season. You're going to have alternating. They're going to play games. The whole goal is to get through 2 transfer portal windows without one leaving. That is the goal. And that is how you handle it. And whenever you have 2 really good quarterbacks like Walker Howard, like Austin Simmons, you want whoever the better of the 2 and whoever is going to develop at the highest level to this spring be at the best possible version of themselves. I think the Austin Simmons, Walker Howard quarterback competition in the spring is going to be the greatest quarterback competition in the history of Ole Miss, honestly. Going back to John Valton, those days back in the early 60s and late 50s, whenever he played 3 in a game. But Austin Simmons and Walker Howard, we talk about Jaxson Dart and Luke Altmaier. That was a cute quarterback competition. That really never was a quarterback competition. I mean, you wanted to treat Luke Altmaier well and all of that, and there might have been a rocky start to the Jaxson Dart Lane Kiffin relationship, but that was never really a quarterback competition. You have the Matt Corral and John Rice Plumlee. That was only a quarterback competition because it was Rich Rod's offense. It would not be a quarterback competition with anybody else. But in that offense, John Rice Plumlee fitted a little bit better. When you look at other quarterback competitions that have happened in recent years, they just don't stack up at all. I mean, Romaro Miller and Eli Manning, but that wasn't a competition because Romaro was a upperclassman and Eli was like a first-year player. But perceptionally, I guess, because of the last name and what could happen, that became one. But in 2025, the quarterback that comes out on the field the first game, whether it be Austin Simmons, Walker Howard, or AJ Maddox, will have won the most important quarterback competition in Ole Miss history. And because this room is so good, the national media doesn't necessarily get to write Ole Miss off in 2025 and beyond. Austin Simmons, I've compared him to Tua plus 3 inches. That whenever the left-handed guy, really good player, everybody's seen him throw the football that has been in there, has been impressed. He has a chance to be really good. Walker Howard, everybody knows what he can do. AJ Maddox, we saw a little bit in the touch football game in the spring that he can spin the ball as well. So as good as that room is, potentially I think the best room in all of college football, potentially because of how deep it is. Ole Miss has a chance to keep this going in 2025 and beyond. Now, a lot of that is going to determine based on evaluations in the transfer portal this year. And high school recruiting, Ole Miss has to do a little bit in high school recruiting as well, because Ole Miss after this season is going to lose probably somewhere in the ballpark of 50 players. But one of those players is not going to be quarterback. And well, Jaxson Dart, but you know what I mean. You're going to have something there to fill that, when in other positions you may have to go out in the portal to replace them. That's what I meant by that. So we will see. All I know is Ole Miss has a chance in 2025 and beyond to be really good and to continue their growth because of the quarterback room. Austin Simmons, Walker Howard, AJ Maddox. Really good football players. And when you look at the running backs that are due with eligibility to come back, there's a chance that the running back room looks really good next season as well. Wide receiver with Dylan Alford and potentially somebody like Winston Watkins. The wide receiver room, you can see it coalescing as well. And the transfer portal, Ole Miss is going to be really good after we saw this season. Should be really interesting stuff, and we'll see exactly how they do. Up next, we will dive into how Lane Kiffin's NFL-style approach to Ole Miss camp could give Ole Miss a crucial edge in January. Stay tuned for that. Game Time is the place to get your Ole Miss tickets. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, all the views from your seats, and the lowest price guarantee. They take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss football tickets. The views from your seat, there's not really a bad seat in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium if you think about it. But this app will give you the opportunity to see exactly what it will look like from that seat. So you can see that before you purchase the tickets. They have lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all of the stuff customer service wise that makes them really good. So take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets with Game Time. And with this being the most anticipated football season in Ole Miss history, I might be able to help you out with tickets. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. And with Ole Miss being sold out for Oklahoma and for Georgia already, and they might be at this point for Kentucky as well, Game Time might be your only avenue to get tickets to get into the stadium on that Saturday. So download the Game Time app. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy Locked On College Football Podcast. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussion of the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the portal, NIL, new college football expanded playoffs, and even more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. They also have a 24/7 stream on that channel as well. So Ole Miss is doing fall camp a little bit differently. And there's a reason for that. Everybody talks about being cutting edge and things like that, but there's a little bit of a semblance of a method to the madness of Lane Kiffin. And if this Ole Miss football team is getting ready to potentially play 16 games this season, you can't beat up the body starting immediately. Lane Kiffin, in his press conference yesterday, referred to it to immediately starting to train for a marathon by running 20 miles. That's the old school football coach way for conditioning and things like that. Lane Kiffin is doing this according to the NFL model, which is a ramp. He mentioned 3 practices in the first 5 days were part of the ramp. And in doing that, they have a ton of walkthroughs, a ton of meeting time, a lot of intellectual type periods to where you learn, you do what you need to do. You have a walkthrough so you can do it practically. And then you have the practice that day or the next day, and it goes into fruition. That is the way they do that. It's the NFL model. And the reason they're doing that, in my opinion, and honestly is probably a real opinion, is this season he's hoping it goes 16 games, at least 15 games. But the NFL is used to getting a body ready to handle 17 games worth of wear and tear. So it makes sense that whenever you're trying to have a season that is extended to a certain level, to make sure your guys are as fresh as possible at the end of the year when it matters, it makes sense that you kind of go a little bit easy at the beginning. As long as you're learning your stuff, as long as you're getting your conditioning in, it makes all the sense in the world. And with the strength and conditioning staff starting in January to get these guys up to speed at the start of fall camp, the first couple of days of fall camp aren't even about conditioning anymore. The players have to be in shape when fall camp begins. So all the running that comes from those 2-a-days and 3-a-days and all of that stuff that coaches did back in the 1900s, that's kind of washed out whenever the conditioning aspect of the deal is not really taken out. Now, the only thing that Ole Miss has to do as far as conditioning sake is making sure in August they practice outside and get used to the heat. The heat is probably the main thing to keep yourself from wilting in the fourth quarter in football games. But as far as learning installs and learning the offense and defense and things like that, you have to take it in a classroom setting, do it in a walkthrough, then do it practically, and then it ramps up from this week to next week. And then by week 3 and week 4 of preseason football, you should be getting ready to hit the other team. You should be completely ramped up and ready to go with a completely fresh body, I should say. Now, everybody that has practiced football knows that whenever you start camp, whether it be the 4th of August or whenever it is, those first couple of days, you are really fresh. And then by about week 3, you are really worn down. Like every bit of your energy is soaked out of you. And it's up to the coaches to get the legs back. You've heard people say that expression. They're trying to get the legs back. And that's because you've honestly worn them down so much so quickly that after week 3, you were kind of there. And the football camp mentality of the 1900s, the Junction Boys time, was to be ready at your peak and ready to go by the opener. That is not something that is good now. If Ole Miss peaks for Furman, we have a problem. Ole Miss needs to peak for Georgia or afterwards. You need to win games getting up to that point, but that's about the time that you're looking at peaking as far as what your team is. So we talked about over the last couple of weeks about how I was worried about Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss puckering with the expectations of this football season, that it might be a little bit too much. And I talked with Michael Borky tonight a little bit about that as well. But Lane Kiffin is not puckering early on in camp. And one of the signs that you can see is the way that they are practicing. Whenever you know a red flag of, hey, this is a little bit too much for him, or we need to worry about this because they're genuinely concerned with what's going on. You're not seeing that at the moment. You're seeing a very loose Ole Miss football team, an extremely focused Ole Miss football team, which we are going to talk about in just a second, but a very loose football team. And that comes from the coach that obviously likes the talent of this football team and sees the talent that is all over the field in just about every position. Ole Miss in 2024 is going to be very special. We talked about, will Ole Miss have staying power in 2025 and beyond? That is a question that we're going to have to figure out starting in December, moving on. But for 2024, it's all there. Everything is there. And Lane Kiffin knows it. And it's really, really good for me to see that we're trending in a looser direction as opposed to a tighter direction. One thing that Ole Miss has a problem with from time to time, and take it for what it's worth, okay? But let's talk about Tennessee Tech. I think it was at 2018 or something like that. The Gray Kessinger years playing baseball. Tennessee Tech beat Ole Miss in that game, beat them twice in a regional final. And that stadium got really, really tight. You just feel it to where everybody in the stadium was like, oh, how are we going to mess this up and not get to where we need to be? To the point it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And those self-fulfilling prophecies, when it comes to Ole Miss sports, always has my antenna up to pay attention for. This football team is not trending that direction, at least in the early part of the season. If there's a couple of close games in the non-conference slate, I do not know how it will be. But early on in the season, it's going a really good direction for Ole Miss, and it might be because of what we're going to talk about in the next segment. Coming up next on Locked On Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin says the Rebels have extreme buy-in right now. They don't have to deal with people being late and stuff like that. The main reason is that means they're hungry for success. Don't miss this. All right, so we're going to talk this segment about buy-in a little bit. And it's interesting to me with the leader of this team being Jaxson Dart. And you can see his numbers on the screen as we do this. 233 for 358, 3,300 yards, 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. A really good quarterback that had a really good year a year ago. He did all the stuff that needed to do. He had it set up to where he set up this whole recruiting thing to where he built this roster. Okay? So much of his legacy is based off of this 2024 team. If Ole Miss goes 11-1, 10-2, makes the college football playoff, he's going to leave Ole Miss with 90 to 95% of the quarterbacking records, running and passing, the winningest quarterback in school history. Basically, everything you need to have number 2 in the rafters, Jaxson Dart will have accomplished that. So him being extremely focused and extremely bought in should surprise no one. But the Ole Miss Pro mindset has led to an extreme buy-in, according to Lane Kiffin in Monday's press conference. He talked about that he's not having to deal with people not being where they're supposed to be, being late for meetings. That's what he called the extreme buy-in of what's going on. And that is potentially led by Jaxson Dart, JJ Pegues, Jared Ivey, Trey Harris, heck, Ulysses Bentley. There's a lot of players on this team. Now, also, when you look at it, there's a lot of older players on this team to where they are matured. And whenever you talk to players, and people have talked about talking on pro day, essentially, not pro day, media day, to players, it's like, oh, these guys sounded like professional athletes. They sounded like the real deal. And that is because they are older, more mature players. But the extreme buy-in and the pro mindset that they have completely bought into has made it to where you can get a lot of work done at practice because you're not going to have loafs. You're going to have people playing at an extremely high level. The practice is going to look different than, say, it did in 2005 when Ole Miss practiced with Ed Orgeron in his first year. You're looking at a program that has been built up at the highest level, getting ready for a run that Ole Miss has not seen in 60 years, and they are completely bought in about what they could be. Completely bought in. Absolutely bought in. And because of that, that gives you flexibility in the other stuff. There's not a lot of energy from people expending on is like, where is this guy? Why isn't he in the meeting? Are people going to class? Where are the people that's supposed to be in study hall? You're not having to deal with those problems. You have a bunch of coaches and analysts talking about, okay, well, we've installed 3 days worth of practice in 1 day because we could do that because everybody is so bought in. What do we have in store moving forward? And coaches like Zach Arnett and Joe Judge that are analysts that just get to coach football, and you have these small-sided areas because they can coach on the field now to where linebacker-wise, you can have very specific thing. We talked yesterday about TJ Daugherty and Suntarine Perkins working with Pete Golding to get ready to go. The rest of the linebackers, the rest of the linebackers were not left alone to their own devices. They were getting work just as much as everybody else. The number of analysts and coaches on the Ole Miss staff allowed them to have these small-sided breakouts when it came to individuals to make sure that players like TJ Daugherty and Suntarine Perkins, who are going to be huge portions of this team, are getting work. All of them are free to do this job because the team is so locked in. Basically, we're going to talk about this. It's like Ed Orgeron's dream. Whenever you have somebody this single-mindedly focused about what he's doing. This was his dream when he got to Ole Miss and said that, hey, practice is going to be harder than the game. Remember that? Everybody remembers the build a fence around Memphis, but what about hey, practice is going to be harder than the game. So we'll see how it goes. But I told you weeks ago that culture-wise, I was not necessarily worried because of Jaxson Dart, Jared Ivey, those guys. And that is apparently coming to fruition. So we'll see exactly how that goes. So, all right, let's talk about what has been going on in camp, on practice. People might notice that they have not seen Nate Kalepo in the early part of practices, and they're like, is there a problem? Nate's going through concussion protocol, apparently. Apparently, he went home in the offseason, had a car accident, and in that car accident got a concussion. So he's going through concussion protocol right now. He's going to be fine, but it is what it is. So we'll see how he goes as they take care of him. Henry Parrish Jr. in his press conference on Monday talked about finishing the drill coming back to Ole Miss and how it almost was a no-brainer to come back to Ole Miss, even though he thought when he left 2 years ago that he was not going to find his way back. He ended up finding his way back with Kevin Smith and all of that. And I think he's going to be a pretty important cog in the Ole Miss offense as it moves forward. You have Ulysses Bentley, who has a chance to be the Jerry and Ely plus type running back of explosivity. You have Rashad Amos, who has a chance to be the thumper and looking at what he can do then. Henry Parrish is just kind of that running back that keeps the trains moving. Excellent receiver of the football. And they're going to use, apparently, they said this in the press conference, they're lining them up in slot and using them in the receiving game. When Jordan Rodgers talked about 5 wide receivers, I think that's what they meant. You're going to see Bentley, you're going to see Amos, you're even going to see Parrish lined up as a slot wide receiver from time to time, and they're going to do that out of 11 personnel. So we'll see exactly how that looks. But with their explosiveness, I think that people should not overlook what could happen with those players. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which why we're the number one podcast around Ole Miss. So your support means the world to us. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin. He will get you hyped for an exciting season with in-depth discussions on the upcoming games and the ever-evolving landscape of college athletics, from conference realignment to the transfer portal to NIL updates, the new college football playoffs. Spencer covers it all. You can find Locked On College Football on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also, exciting news here. You can become a Locked On Ole Miss Insider, the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss sports. Our texting program sends you notifications on everything relevant without the hassle of message boards filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial and experience the future of college sports coverage. We're constantly adding new perks as we grow, so don't miss out. The link is in the descriptions. And for those of you watching on YouTube, we're going to send you to Locked On College Sports right now. Howdy toddy, everyone.